Every single year, more than 2 million tourists flood into the Cotswolds to take photos of what they believe is real medieval England. They're in the wrong place. The authentic medieval England, the one where ordinary families still wake up, make tea, walk the kids to school, and lock the door behind them, is hidden in the towns the tour buses deliberately skip. Subscribe, add, comment for more medieval videos. One of these towns has an entire street where the exact same houses have been continuously occupied since 1348, while the Black Death was still raging across Europe. Another has alleyways barely 3 feet wide, where soldiers from the Wars of the Roses once ran for their lives, and families still live above those alleyways today. These are 15 forgotten English towns where normal people still live inside genuine medieval houses. And every single one of them survived for exactly the same reason. And it's the complete opposite of what you'd expect. They didn't survive because they stayed rich and powerful. They survived because, at some point between 1500 and 1800, they went spectacularly broke. They became too poor to tear down their old houses, and too poor to be worth the Industrial Revolution's attention. Their economic collapse became their architectural life insurance policy. Stick with me. By the end of this video, you're going to have a whole new bucket list of places you actually want to visit. And you're going to understand why the best preserved history is almost always the stuff that temporarily became worthless. Let's go. Number 1. Back in 1524, a royal tax assessment ranked Lavenham as the 14th wealthiest town in the entire kingdom by taxable wealth, even though it had fewer than 900 residents. It was richer on paper than Lincoln, York, and Oxford combined. The reason? Wool, specifically a premium dyed broadcloth that sold for fortunes in the Low Countries and the Hanseatic ports. Lavenham's merchants were making serious money. Then, in the 1560s, cheaper Dutch cloth flooded the market. By 1600, the town was finished. Bankrupt. Done. And that bankruptcy is the only reason 1,500 people still live inside medieval houses today. The merchants couldn't afford to knock their timber-framed houses down. They couldn't afford to remodel them in the latest Tudor fashion either. So the houses built in the 1480s simply stayed. Today, Lavenham has roughly 340 listed buildings still standing on their original plots. Many lean at angles that look impossible. The famous Crooked House on the High Street tilts nearly 15 degrees. That isn't shoddy building. It's unseasoned green oak warping exactly as the medieval carpenters knew it would. Over centuries, the frames locked into stress positions that actually make them stronger. 600 years later, those same frames are still load-bearing. The Guildhall on the Market Square has been in continuous civic use since 1470. Walk down the High Street at 8 a.m. and you'll see people leaving for work from front doors that opened onto the same street when Henry VII was on the throne. Lavenham's 21st century survival is a direct result of its 16th century failure. This town is literally named after a flower, the saffron crocus. From around 1300 to 1700, the field surrounding Saffron Walden grew England's entire commercial saffron crop. It was used for luxury dyes and insanely expensive medicine. That wealth is still visible in the buildings. More than 400 listed structures, many covered in pargeting. The decorative English plasterwork where wet lime is combed, incised and pressed into patterns of grapevines, dragons, and royal coats of arms, while it's still soft. The Old Sun Inn on Church Street has pargeting dated 1676, laid over an oak frame from the 1450s. People are still living and sleeping behind those plaster panels. Today, Saffron Walden has about 15,000 residents. The medieval core is still a fully working town. There's a primary school operating inside buildings that were already standing during the reign of Henry VI. When cheaper Mediterranean saffron undercut local prices in the early 1700s, the growers went bust, and the houses stayed exactly where they were. On the 4th of May, 1471, a small Lancastrian army was slaughtered in a meadow just south of Tewkesbury. The Battle of Tewkesbury effectively ended the third phase of the Wars of the Roses. The 17-year-old Prince Edward of Westminster was killed during the rout. The town the battle was named after is still here, and it still has the alleyways those soldiers ran through. Tewkesbury preserves more than 90 medieval and Tudor alleys, locally called the alleys, some of them less than 3 feet wide. These are public rights-of-way that have never been widened or altered since the 15th century. The timber-framed houses on either side have jettied upper floors that overhang the alley by up to 2 feet. Families still live above them, with modern plumbing, but the original floor plans unchanged. Tewkesbury Abbey, completed in 1121, dominates the skyline. It was saved from Henry VIII's dissolution in 1539, only because the townspeople scraped together £453 and bought it from the crown. The abbey saved the town saved the abbey. Roughly 20,000 people live in Tewkesbury now, most in newer houses on the outskirts, but the medieval core remains proudly residential. In 1967, Stamford became the very first conservation area in England under the Civic Amenities Act, not because it was pretty, but because it had more than 600 listed buildings inside its medieval core. The government literally said, "This town is too important to change." Most of those buildings are built from the same honey-colored limestone that has been quarried from the same beds for more than 8 centuries. Stamford began as a Saxon settlement, was sacked by Vikings in 877, rebuilt under William the Conqueror, and then boomed on the wool trade between 1200 and 1500. When the trade route shifted, the money moved to Norwich and London. By 1700, Stamford was a quiet market town with no industry, no harbor, no railway hub. 200 years of quiet obscurity is exactly why its medieval streets survived untouched. Today, around 20,000 people live here, and roughly half of them inside the conservation area. Stamford School, founded in 1532, still uses its original buildings for classrooms. The town has doubled as 19th century England in dozens of films and TV shows because it doesn't need set dressing. It already is the set. Dunster is tiny, only about 800 residents in the village proper, but it contains the most distinctive surviving medieval commercial building in southwest England, the Yarn Market, an octagonal wooden structure standing right in the middle of the high street, built in 1609 on the site of an even older market. The entire roof rests on a single central post. 8 stalls once sat in a ring underneath for selling finished cloth. Dunster Castle on the hill above has Norman foundations from the 1070s. The Luttrell family held it continuously from 1376 until 1976, 600 years, and one single door key passed down through 20 generations. The streets below the castle are lined with timber-framed and stone houses that are still private homes. The Luttrell Arms, originally built around 1450 as a guest house for the Abbot of Cleve, has been operating as a hotel for 5.5 centuries. Same building, same job. No franchise, no corporate owner. Just continuous hospitality since the Wars of the Roses were still being fought. You've almost certainly seen Castle Combe without knowing its name. It was the filming location for Steven Spielberg's War Horse. It's appeared on more British calendars than the royal family. And almost every photograph taken since 1900 shows a village that hasn't structurally changed since about 1450. Tucked into a steep wooded valley in the Cotswolds, the oldest house in the core dates to the 14th century. Many of the cottages were once weavers' homes from the 1440s, when Castle Combe was a center of the broadcloth industry. The market cross in the square was erected in the 1300s. What protects it today is geography. The valley walls are too steep. The river runs straight through the middle. There is literally no room to expand. Cars are banned from the historic core. TV aerials and satellite dishes are banned by local covenant. Result? Around 350 people live in stone cottages older than the United States, and the village looks identical in 2024 to how it looked in 1750, which looked identical to 1500. In the year 1300, Sandwich was one of the most important ports in England. a full member of the Cinque Ports Confederation that supplied ships to the crown in exchange for massive tax breaks. It sent vessels with Edward III's army to Crécy in 1346. By 1500, the harbor was silting up. By 1600, the sea had retreated almost 2 miles. By 1700, Sandwich was no longer a port at all. That total economic collapse is precisely why the medieval town is still standing. There was no money to rebuild, no industrial revolution to bulldoze the past. Today, Sandwich has more than 500 listed buildings. Strand Street, once the waterfront, contains one of the highest concentrations of medieval and Tudor merchant houses in England. Those warehouses and homes built between 1380 and 1480 are now private residences. The sea is 2 miles away across reclaimed marsh. The front doors that once opened onto a busy harbor now open onto quiet streets filled with flower boxes. Wells is officially the smallest city in England, about 12,000 residents, but it has a cathedral, and right behind that cathedral is Vicars Close, the oldest purely residential street in Europe, still used for its original purpose. Construction began in 1348, right in the middle of the Black Death, and was finished by the early 1350s. 42 identical houses, 21 on each side of a narrow stone-paved street, each with its own tiny front garden, chimney, and front door. They were built for the vicars, choral, the men who sang the daily liturgy in the cathedral. Almost 700 years later, the same houses are still occupied by men who work for the cathedral. The chimneys were raised in the 1470s. Indoor plumbing arrived in the early 20th century. Otherwise, nothing has changed. Same chapel at the north end, same hall above the gateway at the south end. Same residents doing the same job their predecessors were doing in the autumn of 1348, while 1 in every 3 English people was dying of plague. There is no other street in Europe with that level of unbroken continuity. Lacock is the only entire village on this list preserved because one family simply refused to modernize for 4 centuries. After the dissolution of the monasteries in 1539, the abbey and village passed through various hands until the Talbot family took over in 1714. They banned overhead wires, modern paint colors on doors, and any external alterations. In 1944, Matilda Talbot donated the whole village to the National Trust under the same strict rules. Today, roughly 300 people live in stone and timber houses dating from 1300 to 1700. No overhead utility lines, no modern shop fronts. The houses are private homes on long leases. Lacock has been used as a filming location for Pride and Prejudice, Harry Potter, and Cranford because it requires almost zero set dressing. It already looks pre-industrial. Shrewsbury isn't small, about 73,000 residents, but its medieval core, inside the near-perfect loop of the River Severn, is one of the best preserved in Britain. More than 660 listed buildings. Streets like Wildcop, Pride Hill, and Fish Street are lined with timber-framed houses from the 1400s and 1500s. The Bear Steps complex, dating to around 1400, is one of the oldest surviving timber-frame structures in England, still in commercial use. Charles Darwin was born here in 1809, in a house that still stands on the edge of the medieval core. Shrewsbury still functions as a working market town, county administrative center, and residential community, where people commute to work from houses built before the Battle of Bosworth. Burford sits on the edge of the Cotswolds on the old road from London to Gloucester. It was granted a royal charter in 1090 to hold a weekly market and annual fair. The medieval high street drops steeply downhill to a stone bridge over the River Windrush built between 1280 and 1450. Halfway down, you'll find the Tollsey, a tiny stone building from the early 1500s where market tolls were collected. Just past it is the Lamb Inn, a thatched coaching inn operating continuously since around 1420. Almost every house on the high street is still residential and dates from the medieval period through the 17th century. Burford never industrialized. The wool trade faded after 1600, and the railway in the 1850s deliberately bypassed it. That single decision by a Victorian committee in London is why Burford froze in time. About 1,400 people live here today, in houses that were already old when their great-great-grandparents were born. The Thaxted Guildhall is a 3-story timber-framed masterpiece from the 1450s. The ground floor is open on 3 sides, supported by carved oak posts. The second floor is a meeting hall that has been used for civic functions for 570 straight years. The top floor was originally the records room of the Cutlers' Guild. Thaxted made knives, swords, and edged weapons for the English market between 1380 and 1500. The Guildhall is still the town's municipal heart. Council meetings are held there, and parish records are still stored upstairs. Around the Guildhall, more than 200 listed buildings line the streets, many of them timber-framed houses from 1400 to 1600. Composer Gustav Holst lived in one of those cottages on Town Street from 1917 to 1925. The house was already nearly 400 years old when he moved in. He wrote large parts of the planets there. About 2,000 people live in Thaxted today. In 1380, a wealthy wool merchant named William Greville built Greville House on the High Street. It is still standing, still a private residence, 644 years later. Its 2-story bay window is one of the earliest surviving examples in England. The High Street itself is one of the longest continuous stretches of unaltered medieval and early modern facades in the country. Nearly half a mile of stone-fronted houses, every single one still occupied. The almshouses on Church Street were built in 1612 to house 12 poor people of the parish. 400 years later, they still house 12 elderly residents of the parish. About 2,300 people live in Chipping Campden now, walking past the same doorways with their ancestors passed in the reign of Elizabeth I. In the Middle Ages, King's Lynn was the 3rd most important port in England after London and Bristol. It was a full member of the Hanseatic League. Goods from Russia, the Baltic, the Low Countries, and the Mediterranean flowed through its quays for nearly 400 years. The Hanseatic Warehouse on St. Margaret's Lane is the only surviving Hanseatic building in England, built in 1475 for merchants from Lubeck and Hamburg. The brickwork is Flemish bond. The timber roof is original. It's now council offices. Nearby, Hampton Court on Nelson Street is a timber-framed merchant's house from the 1390s still used as a home. The Trinity Guildhall on the Saturday Marketplace was built in 1421 and still serves as the town's main civic building. About 45,000 people live in modern King's Lynn, but several hundred still live inside the medieval core, in houses where Hanseatic merchants once stored Baltic timber and Russian furs 8 centuries ago. We finish in Rye, perched on a sandstone cliff overlooking the marshes of the River Rother, about 15 miles east of Hastings. Like Sandwich, it was a busy medieval port. Like Sandwich, it lost its harbor when the sea retreated in the 1500s. Unlike Sandwich, it kept its strategic hilltop position. For 3 centuries, Rye was a notorious smuggling town. Brandy, lace, and tea moved through tunnels carved beneath the medieval houses from the 1600s right up to the 1830s. The Mermaid Inn on Mermaid Street is the most famous. Its cellars date to 1156. The current building was rebuilt in 1420 after French raiders burned the town in 1377. It has served beer continuously for 600 years. Upstairs bedrooms have hosted smugglers, soldiers, novelists, and now tourists. Novelist Henry James wrote The Wings of the Dove inside Lamb House on a street of medieval cottages. Today, about 4,500 people live in Rye. School buses rumble up the cobbled Mermaid Street every morning. Children walk to class past walls that watched the French invasion fleet burn in 1377. Step back and look at what these 15 towns have in common. Every one of them got rich early. Every one of them lost its main industry between 1500 and 1800. Every one of them was too poor during the Industrial Revolution to demolish what their ancestors built. and every one of them is now more historically valuable than the cities that tore their medieval hearts out in the name of progress. Lavenham lost its wool trade in the 1560s. Sandwich lost its harbor by 1600. Burford was bypassed by the railway in the 1850s. King's Lynn faded when the Hanseatic League collapsed. Each commercial death sentence became an architectural life support machine. The battle isn't over. Lavenham, Wells, Lacock, and Rye have all fought off major planning applications in the last 30 years. The moment a town becomes valuable to developers again, the old houses become targets again. The honest truth is simple. Real architecture only survives when it is temporarily worthless. 600 years of genuine medieval England endured because, for a few crucial centuries, the world forgot how to make money out of it. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the England almost nobody talks about, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell. We dig up forgotten history like this every single week. Drop a comment below and tell me which of these 15 towns you want a full-length deep dive episode on next. The blood-soaked alleys of Tewkesbury, the smugglers' tunnels beneath Rye, or the Hanseatic trade routes that once ran through King's Lynn. I read every single comment. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one, where we go even deeper into the corners of history that time tried to hide.